Hello, Cold Springs Church and the world. We are excited that you decided to join us for the P.O.P podcast. If you didn't see our social media post and you're like, what is going on? What is this? I want to explain it to you a little bit. And here's how I like to explain it. When we think of the church, we think of it like a wave, specifically a Tahoe wave, that it's going to gather energy and then it's going to spread out. So Sunday morning is a key gathering of energy, so to speak. We're all in one room, energized together. And then throughout the week, we're spreading out into our schools, into our workplaces, into our families, into our homes, into our grandparents' homes, wherever else. We're spreading out into the community. What's unique about the Tahoe wave is that when it gathers energy, it's not like an ocean wave where toddlers are being rolled in and moms are screaming. Like, it leaves behind water amongst the rocks, even in the gathering. And for the illustration, we want to call those pockets of peace. Pools of peace, the water that is amongst the rocks. So that's what we call it, those portions of peace. So we're hoping that we are people of peace that dwell in, that float in, that leave behind pools of peace, pockets of peace. So, pop. That's why we're calling it the P.O.P podcast. Hopefully, the podcast is popping. It won't be locking, but it will be dropping on Wednesdays, okay? So join us on Wednesdays. We're going to continue to post this once a week and have people to come here that we'll talk to. And I'd love your feedback. Please use the comments. Use the leave behind reports. Talk to me on a Sunday morning about what you're thinking about the podcast. We want this to be a portion of peace for you. We want this to be something beneficial throughout the week. So if it's not, I want to hear that. And if it is, we want to hear that as well. So here's how we want to start each podcast is that I'm going to get a drink for guests. And I got this drink. This is David Cooke. He's a senior pastor here, one of the pastors here, and has been very meaningful. So I'm excited that he's here. David, I got this drink, and it is called the Keto Cloud. Okay? So this is from Bean Barn. So I'm going to give this to you, and throughout the podcast, you take some sips or don't. You got to take at least one sip, right? Because at the end of the podcast, you have to rate the drink. And the scale is going to be -10 to +10, okay? So save your rating, be thinking about it throughout the podcast, and then you're going to have to rate it. I'm interested about the Keto Cloud because, yeah, does it send you into instant ketosis, or is it a cloud that we're going to float on together? Okay.
Wow, you're deep.
Yeah. It's much deeper meaning. Yeah, there were several other drink names that would have been really funny.
Yeah.
But they weren't gluten-free.
Oh.
So I had to make sure.
Yeah, I got that gluten intolerance thing. So we used to make fun of people around that. And then I became one.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, that's a real thing. Yeah.
Okay. So just to start it off, talk to me about a little bit of, as a young person, what was your religious background? What did faith look like for you growing up? And maybe what was that moment that you're like, yep, I accept Jesus?
Yeah. So I grew up in the eastern part of Oregon, a little town of 500 people, of a town called Huntington, Oregon. So had a very rich history. It was a railroad town, and the church I went to was a Methodist church. And my family, we always went to church from when I was really young, and always in that little church. And there were between 10 and 40 people in this church. So we're talking small.
Yeah.
So that's my religious background. Had some great Sunday school teachers who invested in us, and we had all kinds of different pastors come through because we were tiny and couldn't support somebody full time. So we shared, we'd do Sunday school in the morning, church at night, all kinds of things. And so what I say about my faith background is that I had a really strong religious background that gave me a good foundation. But I didn't really understand or know the gospel or know Jesus. But I was a good kid. I was, I remember I had a girlfriend in high school who was a Mormon, and so her evangelism strategy was to try to convince me of how bad I was, so that I would, accept Mormonism so I could become good.
Yeah.
The problem is that I was a pretty good kid. I was, I wasn't a wild child. I wasn't, rebellious for the most part. I was involved in all kinds of sports and drama. My mother was a music teacher, so I was in band and choir, and I had my mom for 3 or 4 periods a day in school. So it was, a little bit hard to be total wild child with that. It was, but it was in 8th grade. I went to a basketball camp. It was called Northwest Basketball Camp. And up in Cheney, Washington, that was run by a guy named Fred Crowell, and he was a Christian, and the focus of the camp was basketball skill, but it was really about sharing the hope of Jesus with the campers. And so I went to that basketball camp, and on the first day, I was guarding somebody in a pickup game of basketball. He drove to the basket, and when he put his head down, he headbutted me in the jaw, and pretty much I'm sure that he broke it. Or no, he probably cracked it. But ouch. I couldn't eat anything solid. I couldn't chew.
Did they have to
mashed
wire
potatoes.
It shut?
No, they just. Hey, this is this is the 70s, dude.
Okay.
It really is. Rub some dirt on it. It's like X-rays. Yeah, I know. So then the second day, I was in another game, and kid stole a ball, was going for a breakaway, layup. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm going to chase him down. I'm going to block his shot. So I run after him. I jump. I don't think I blocked his shot. But instead of coming down on my toes, I came down on my heels. And I did like this jarring impact on my back.
Yeah.
That left me so I couldn't walk.
Wow.
So... and I did have some micro fracture in my vertebrae with that, and so so I couldn't chew and I couldn't walk. So that's by day 2. So I watched and I listened, and I read the Bible of what I understood. I'd had a Bible with me, and through the devotions, they would give devotional talks and stuff. I came to, I think, began to understand Jesus. That's where I say that I accepted Jesus, but I'm then I went back home. Our little Methodist church was a great church, but there was no discipling. There was no, follow up. The Bible is a book, so you're supposed to start at the beginning and go to the end. And I'm like, I'm like most people. You get about 3 chapters in, and then it gets really weird, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. So then I went back to the camp the next year. I did much better. I made the all-star team.
Wow.
I didn't, apparently God did not need to get my attention nearly as much. And and that's where I really remember sort of crossing that line of faith. And so that's my spiritual background. And one of the things I have seen pretty common is that which is an idol in people's lives, God can tend to take it away. This is particularly true of athletes through injury, to take away their identity that they find within athletics, so that their attention is brought to the Creator. And so that was a little bit of my story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I love that God grabbing a hold of you was literally like, hey, sit down and shut up. And now dive into this.
Yeah. I don't know that I shut up.
Well, I mean, your jaw was literally, you could still talk?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I just couldn't chew anything solid.
I see.
I was just a mashed potatoes, applesauce sort of dude.
All right. So then just sit down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, lay down because,
Yeah.
I walked like a duck. I shuffled around. So
Yeah. No fun. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to go back a little bit and then we'll continue to go forward. What do you feel in that youth time that your parents or parent deposited in you that is still bearing fruit now?
So I was in an interesting place. So I have two older sisters. I'm the youngest, the only boy. They would claim that I might have been a spoiled little brat of some sort, but I would disagree with them in that.
Yeah.
Because I was
Naturally.
angelic. I was not spoiled whatsoever. So my sisters are really into horses, and I was into horses because when you went to horse shows, there's a lot more girls than guys.
Yeah.
Just hey,
Again, naturally.
being
Yeah.
real, right?
Uh-huh.
But then, it's like I can ride a motorcycle and go really fast, or I can bounce around on a horse. And I'm like, I'm going to choose a motorcycle. That's not really answering your question yet, is it?
You're getting there.
So
I can see
I'm
it.
getting there. Yeah. So my dad was the manager over a cement production plant. My mom was a teacher at the school. They were both sort of authority people in the community. And I got, from both my mom and my dad, a great work ethic. And probably the other thing was, so I grew up in this town of 500 people. There was 150 kids from K through 12, 55 kids in our high school. That's a pretty small world. And my parents made sure that we understood that there was a bigger world. So we had exchange students in our home, all the time growing up, and we were involved in the arts and did all these things that I didn't want to do as a little boy, but were good for me. Going to community concerts, and I did dance classes. I did tap and jazz dance.
Wow. When do we get to see that, right? Like, that's the natural.
You see it every day you come to work, buddy.
It's true. Yeah.
So I was, an exchange student in high school. I was an exchange student in college. And it was a local exchange in Montana, not international in high school, but in university I was an international exchange student. So they just really supported seeing a bigger world, and that obviously people who know my story and what I've been involved in my international work, it's very much a central part of my heart.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay. So then going forward, you have this moment. How old were you again at the basketball camp?
I would have been 14, 15.
Okay. So freshman, sophomore-ish, roughly.
Yeah, I was. I was. My birthday is October 30th, so I was held.
Yeah,
I was not held back. I was just.
Yeah.
I could have started, but they started me later, so I was an older kid. So I was 8th grade
Gotcha.
in that first camp.
Yeah.
And then freshman in the second one. So
There you go. Yeah. Similar thing happening, but I'm July, so they actually chose to start me earlier. So I've always been the youngest or the younger one in the class.
Yeah, and still the biggest of
Yeah,
everybody.
absolutely, 100%.
Yes.
I was assumed to be the oldest, but never, almost
Yes.
never.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So 14, 15, what are the rest? I mean, the rest of high school goes forward. And then where did you go to college? What did college look like after that?
Yeah, I sort of followed my sister, my second sister, who is a little over a year older than me. So her birthday is in September, and mine's in October. So she went to Southern Oregon State College, it was called at that time. Now it's called Southern Oregon University in Ashland. And so I ended up going there and started there. I was there for 2 years. Was in the engineering program, and then transferred to Oregon State University, where my sister had gone as well. Sort of followed her there, into their pre-engineering program, of which I failed miserably at. I ended up on academic probation. I think I had a 1.8 GPA at one point.
Wow.
Which is not real good, you know.
Yeah, definitely not.
And then I transferred into the School of Business. So, yeah.
So at that time, you're flunking out of pre-engineering,
yeah.
and then you're transferring over to business.
Yeah.
Like, what was your hopes for business?
Yeah. Well, it was international business. There was interest and heart towards economic development in developing countries. Was again sort of the international piece. And interestingly enough, so in applying to the School of Business to get into them, moving out of the School of Engineering, I saw a advertisement for an exchange program to Australia. So you have to know, okay, I have like a 1.8 GPA. I'm not doing great. Yeah, let's send this guy to represent us to another country, right? So, I'm sort of dumb that way. And I'm like, well, of course I'm going to apply. Why would I not? So I applied and I was accepted to go to study at New South Wales Institute of Technology in Sydney, Australia. So, and that was again part of the international thing. So when I was doing the School of Business things, I was talking to business professors and I was looking at some of the economic development and international business pieces.
So then, I mean, if you're there in college, when was the moment that you're like, I need to become a pastor? What was that calling? What did that look like?
Yeah, that happened in Australia. So God was leading up to that. When I was at Southern Oregon State College, I got involved in a campus ministry called Campus Ambassadors, which was a part of the Conservative Baptist. They have a different name now, but Conservative Baptist denomination. So that's where I really began to be discipled. And interestingly enough, that leader, he had a heart for sort of the underserved, poor, and really challenged me within that and challenged us. And so that was a piece of it. When I went to Oregon State University, I was at Northwest Hills Church, and really influential in my life was the college pastor there, Phil Roblicki. They had a full-time college pastor. And Phil gave me opportunity to teach some college classes, Bible studies, and I was a Bible study leader. They did a in-depth. Their approach to their ministry was small groups that were doing in-depth Bible studies through a book, of the Bible, and so I was one of those leaders to do that. And Phil really came alongside me, and he gave me opportunity. So when I went to Sydney, Australia, I went there with a real purpose that I wanted to go and see, was my faith built on my familiar culture, familiar church, sort of the easiness of being a Christian in the world that I was a part of, with my friends and family and everybody being responsive to that? Or was it built on something deeper? Was it built on really on Jesus, is the question I was asking. And so so I went to Australia, and you have to know, this is 1985. This is before the internet. This is before email. So if you wanted to communicate with people, you wrote these things called letters. And if you
a part of the alphabet,
like each right, letter, you wrote it out. Yeah. Okay. And because you were sending it overseas, you had special paper that was like toilet paper. Okay. It was very thin. Single ply toilet paper. Okay. It was very thin, so it was very light. And so that was how you communicated. Or if you wanted to splurge, you called, made an international call, and that was stinking expensive.
Yeah.
So you didn't do that. So
Yeah.
me going to literally to the other end of the earth, to Australia, I knew I could be anybody I wanted to be.
Yeah.
There was no Facebook, there was no
No looking up
Instagram,
history,
there's no cell phones where everybody's taking pictures and posting everybody
Yeah.
and yourself. I could be anybody I wanted to be, and I could pretty much do anything I wanted and reinvent myself. And so, but when I went there, I realized I could only be who God created me to be. And so I went there in January of 1985. I was there through 1985. In October of 1985, I went to a Christian conference. I'm trying to think of what parallel would be. There was a thing called like Jesus Northwest, which was a music festival,
Okay.
Christian music festival and teaching and that type of
Yeah.
thing. It was that type. It was called the Black Stump Festival. Some of you people out there who remember, some of the OG Christian music, a guy named Steve Taylor was the band, the Steve Taylor Band. You need to check him out. He's out there. Yeah. He has some pretty amazing stuff. He was a little radical for his time.
Like,
And-
if Lincoln Brewster is like the common middle ground, where is that?
Oh,
guy?
Steve
Like-
Taylor he was probably in some people's mind a little on the punk side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I really
he
should check him
yeah,
out. Yeah.
He was a very fascinating character. Yeah. Definitely worth checking out. So Steve Taylor Band, had some really good songs. And so I was there at Black Stump Festival, and I had this really strong sense that God was doing something, was up to something. Oh, I didn't know what. I was with some other friends, and I remember telling them, I'm like, man, I don't know God's doing something, and I don't know what it is, but God is really doing something. And then the next day, I had this very powerful encounter with God. It was at one of the main plenary speakers. The main speaker was a guy named John Smith, and John Smith was sort of the one of the influential people for me was a guy named Anthony Campolo. Anthony Campolo was this evangelical Christian who was a bit on the radical side. Within that time and within that day. And John Smith was an Anglican priest, pastor, who had a motorcycle gang called the God Squad, and he would go to Hell's Angels rallies around Australia and preach the gospel.
The God Squad.
Yeah, I think it was called the God Squad. Yeah, and he would preach the gospel. He would do weddings, for Hell's Angels, so that he would have an opportunity to preach the gospel. A lot of people push back. So he was the speaker, and so a pretty dynamic, guy. And it was one night when he was speaking, and I remember he was speaking about David and Bathsheba, and David and John or Nathan confronting him, but it wasn't really about the message. It was about God's reaching down his hand to me. I'm sitting there in the crowd, and God saying, "You can take my hand or not." And it wasn't a salvation of like you're either in or out. It was a vocation. It was a calling. That you can receive this calling or not. It doesn't mean you're not going to go to heaven or whatever, have a relationship with me. And I just really felt the power of, Jesus talks about, that uses the illustration of building a tower, that you should count the costs to, make sure you have the stuff. And I really felt that sense of counting the costs. And I said, yes. And I had absolutely no idea what that meant. No idea.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. Just even to compare it to, there's been a few moments of feeling like God has called me, like calling me into ministry. Felt that at a mission Placerville during a worship set. and then a call to break up with a girlfriend after high school that I was dating. In both of those, I had almost the opposite. I had no sense of counting the cost. It was like I felt like God told me to do this, so I'm just gonna, like, what else would I do? I'm just gonna go. And I almost started to find the cost after. Yeah. It just, I guess, shows there's not like a formula to this, but it's just interesting to me that there was a sense for you of like, okay, I've got to count the cost.
Yeah.
I've almost had to be shown the cost and gone, are you still going to do this? Are you still going to move?
Well, but the thing was, I didn't know what that cost was.
Yeah.
It was,
Okay.
but I knew that this was a pivotal time.
Yeah.
When that happened that night, I just really felt I needed to pray with somebody about it. So, in about that time, John Smith was walking by, and I said, "Hey, I just had this." So I stopped him. I said, "I had this, powerful experience. I feel like I really need to pray with somebody. Can we do that?" He said, "Yeah, I've got to do this talk, and then come backstage afterwards, and I'll pray with you." And that's just sort of me. It's like, oh, I'll just choose the main speaker of the whole thing. Why wouldn't I talk
no
to him?
intimidation. Yeah.
No. So he did his talk, and it was, again, David, Bathsheba, Nathan. And then I went back there, and I shared with him what had happened. And he said, yeah, that a very similar experience had happened to him. And he prayed with a nun who prayed with him when he got his call into ministry. And he told me his story, and the nun said to him, to John, says, "John, what has happened is that you've gotten into the boat and you're headed across the sea. You just don't know what the other shore is." And when he said that, I was like, that is exactly what happened to me. That described it perfectly. And so I came back changed, transformed. I mean, things were different. Back to Sydney. That was October 3rd, October 4th, October 3rd and 4th. I have a Bible that's written into it. Have the word sealed in 2 Timothy.
Wow.
Yeah, because he used the passage about. Actually, I marked it. Do you mind if I read the Bible?
Of course not.
Yeah. So 2 Timothy 1. Where he says, "For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power, of love, and self-control." So that was the scripture he used as he prayed over me So I wrote "sealed" in my little Bible, New American Standard Bible, NASB.
So I want to double back super quickly. You had said that you were leaving for Australia, and you were like, man, I can be anyone. But then you found out you could only be who God had created you to be.
Yeah.
So I even feel like this morning we had the student leadership meeting, and I'm telling them, like, hey, you're finding out right now how God is gifting you. Like, lean into that. And this is a space that you have opportunity and permission and authority to lean into that. But I was struck by that statement to go, like, I know that there's people that maybe are, who knows, any age, that are questioning how has God created me? What am I gifted at? What am I meant for? What would you say to be like guidance on how to seek that out? How to figure that out? Is there a fancy test to take? Is there like, of course, not. Yeah.
Well, you've been around me a lot, so you know my little leadership pyramid of know yourself, lead yourself, influence others. I'm really big in the intentionality around self-awareness and growing within that.
Yeah.
So I would say to that, I think it's a really good question for us throughout our life, because there's always things that are happening, growing, learning, becoming aware of. And so one is to be intentional. I think that there are assessment tools out there that are really helpful. There are approaches that around coaching, finding a coach that work around that of understanding how we're wired, how we see life, how we experience life, how we go about life. So, one of the simple ones we've talked about is, are you primarily a thinker? Do you live in your head? Are you a feeler? Do you live out of your heart? Are you a doer? Do you live out of your body, out of your actions? So that very, simple thing can be very powerful, insight, give us insight into it. The Strengths Finder, Gallup Strengths is a really helpful tool to understand how we're wired. So, but also it's the humility to ask people, what is your experience of me?
Yeah.
And then one of a great quote by Angela Mayu, I can't remember, but she said, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I love that quote. It came in a very appropriate time in a very difficult relationship that I was a part of. And so that's, but sometimes we need somebody to hold the mirror up, right?
Yeah.
And going back sort of the David Bathsheba Nathan story, David did these horrible things. He lied to himself extraordinarily effectively, and it wasn't until Nathan told this story about a little lamb and the man.
He's holding a full body mirror,
right?
and David's looking at it
right.
like, we should mess that guy up,
right? It's like, and interestingly, even when we're talking about the story of John Smith, the thing that I remember is in the part of the story that I still hear his voice where he effectively said, "You are the man." When Nathan said to David, it's like, I'm going to kill that guy. It's like, you are the man. So, we need people in our life who's going to say, you are the man. Not necessarily in the negatives, but we definitely need that. But also in the positives of
you are the man.
Yeah.
You are him.
You are the woman. This is how God has shaped you, created you. And it is, it would use psalmist, fearfully and wonderfully made, right?
Yeah. It's such a good point. I was just in some of the classes that I was taking. There was a huge couple weeks that we were really focused on, like, how do you determine calling within the church? How do you find gifting? And they were hugely focused on, like, it is the church's job, the congregation's job, to look at each other and go, you are really good at this. Like, you are good at this. So, like, if there's a calling, it should be confirmed by people acknowledging that calling or acknowledging that gifting. Yeah. So I go like, man, there's so many times that I see something in someone or in a student, and instead of going, hey, you did a really good job at that, or like, hey, that was really awesome, and even like maybe even some like, did you know in the Bible, like, that's a gifting. Do you feel like you hear this a lot? I've talked myself out of doing that to go, well, I don't want to give them too big of a head. Or like, oh, I'm sure they hear that all the time. I don't want to bother them or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, man, that's my job as a part of the church is to look at you and go, hey, you're good at this. Like, and this is how God gifts us and builds us up. And then especially with our young people that are being told, hey, you're finding that out. Yeah. Well, how are they going to find it out? Yeah. We've got to kind of tell them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of a story. There was a quite significant leader, I can't remember his name at this point, that he was talking about how people came into ministry, and he cited some sort of study or whatever that identified that it started in junior high where somebody acknowledged or recognized the hand of God in somebody's life and pointed that out. And that planted the seed. And that's always really stuck with me of trying to do that, if I see that. And I think that that's actually one of the strengths of Cold Springs Church. And we have this long line of, it really started with Andy Abramson. when he came, as a part of the team as one of the first full-time youth pastors, and then Nick Campagna, being developed out of that, and how he developed internship program, but started with Andy's vision around that. We had interns under Andy. We had interns with Nick. We've had interns with you. You were an intern. That it's recognizing, acknowledging the work of God in somebody's life, giving them the environment to be able to work out their salvation with fear and trembling, so to speak, in Paul's words. So.
Yeah. I always talk about it in that, like, this sounds bad, but like I am a product of Cold Springs Church. So in a lot of ways, if we want to go, what is Cold Springs Church good at, or what is the culture of Cold Springs? Like, I'm going to resemble almost all of that because I'm, from high school in internship, being given access, being given leadership. I'm a reflection in a lot of ways of Cold Springs. And of course, there's my personal everything and my own growth, but I think there's lots of positives to take away and no negatives, because I'm fine. Yeah. There's nothing negative to come out.
Yeah, and just, going back sort of beginning of the story, Huntington United Methodist Church, between 10 and 40 people in it, right? Is that there was a generation. So my oldest sister, Vivienne, is 5 years older than me. Yeah. And and really from her, including into my generation, that little church raised up a number of highly devoted followers of Jesus. Yeah. And so one of my very good friends growing up, Tim Obendorf, he became a missionary with Youth at the Mission. He started a business in China, a bicycle tour business, in order to share the gospel. Him and his wife, Rosa, who's a Hong Kong Chinese woman, they lived there. They did ministry forever, still continue to do that. He came out of Huntington United Methodist Church, this little church. Another great friend, Lisa Benintendi. I think I said that wrong. Sorry, Lisa. But really devoted follower of Jesus. She was a teacher up in Oregon, raised a family of devoted followers of Jesus. Tim's older brother, Art, was also youth at the Mission. I mean, there was this interesting, we look at, big churches, and things have to be big in order to have impact. And how we have impact is we invest in people's lives, and we release the work of God in them into the world, and that's where we see really cool things happen.
So I want to jump ahead a little bit as we kind of wrap up here. So you were a youth pastor. Right?
Yeah.
In Paradise.
I was.
I want to talk about that experience,
right? Yeah.
and walk through that just a little bit, because I know it was. So the average stint of a youth pastor now is 18 months. Yeah. How long were you a youth pastor?
Pretty much that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
2 years. Yeah. So we were in Chicago. I'd gone to seminary. Pam and I so I got married to Pam in 1987. We went to Canada, worked at a Young Life camp for 3 months, and then we moved to Chicago. And went to for me to go to seminary. So lived there for 9 years, and then I was hired at First Baptist Church of Paradise to be the associate pastor, youth pastor, and I was hired by Denny, and Denny was a lifer youth pastor down in Southern California. He had been a youth pastor, I think, for 20 years, 22 years. And this was his first senior pastorate. He was at Downey. He was in Downey, California, Denny Clemenson. And I have never been pastored. I've never been loved better than by Denny. Wow. And he was great. And so, but I kept thinking, you are the expert. What am I doing here? And it was it was an interesting church. It was that there was a lot of dysfunction in relationships. I had a guy who tried to get me fired because he wanted my job, undermined me, and it was some pretty crazy time. And so, but one of the things, understanding how we're wired and how we're made is that within 6 months, what I realized is that my wiring is the point person, is the sort of lead visionary lead person. And so I proceeded to tell my lovely wife that, who had just had our second child, so Noah. So we had Keenan in Chicago area, and then Noah was born. And I'm like, man, I want to look for a different job. And I remember we were at a counseling together, and the counselor asked, Pam, what do you need from David? And she said, I need a year. And I'm like, I just totally deflated on the inside. I thought, I will be dead in a year. I will, because I'm impulsive. I'm like, when I make a decision, it's like, okay, let's move on. Let's just go. Minimize pain, maximize pleasure. There's a number for that. But I said yes, and it was almost a year to the day that I started at Cold Springs Church. So God knew what the time frame was and what it was, and it was a good thing. But what I do say is that my contribution to the church was to kill the youth group. Yeah. So the next person could come in and start and have a fresh start.
Which is a great way to reframe it. But I mean, you killed the youth group. So my question would be, could you say confidently that I'm a better youth pastor than you were?
Absolutely. 100%.
You're so nice.
You are
That's
so far above and beyond. But I will say this.
I'm just going to soak
So
that.
Is every other youth pastor who has ever
you didn't
existed
have to, you keep
better
adding, you
than what I was. So, I mean,
stopped.
I know, but, again, I want to put it into context here is that, yes, you were better. You didn't have a whole lot. You didn't have to go very much higher to get beyond me. So,
but I still did. So
you did.
I'm going to hold on to that.
And of, youth pastors that I was and I've known, you're definitely within the top
500
something percent. Yeah. Yes. No, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. What we have to do, I noticed throughout the whole podcast, you took one sip of the drink.
I took two. I took one at the beginning, and then I took another one just a little bit ago.
Okay.
Do you want me to take another one?
So you don't have to. I think we're kind of knowing where the rating is headed with that evidence. But what would you rate? I mean, it's called the Keto Cloud. Yeah. So in some way, I felt like we've ridden on a cloud this time.
Oh, man,
-10 to +10 is the thing, with 0 being that middle ground. What would you rate the drink that I purchased for you that I gave you as a gift?
Does it have artificial sweetener in it?
It's a cloud. So that would lead us to it does.
Yeah. I can taste the artificial sweetener. So that was probably
not your cup of
And I was, I didn't want to drink too much.
Yeah.
Because you told me that we don't get any break.
Yeah.
And so if I had to use the bathroom or something because I drank the whole thing and then,
kind of backtrack.
And had the other 3 cups of tea this morning, then that might, cause a difficulty in the flow of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what would you pin down as a rating?
Oh, I'm supposed to rate it.
-10, +10.
It's a good strong 6, 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Not even dipping into the negatives with the artificial sweetener.
No.
Yeah. That's great.
It was very kind of you, very thoughtful of you to, bring me a drink.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd place it at like a 0. It's like with -10.
Oh, did you get the same as well?
I did. Yeah, we both have had the same exact drink.
Well, I'm a much more positive person than you are, so you
I
need
guess
to
so.
work. Maybe
That's what
work on that.
Yeah.
Just
Awesome. Well, there you go. Cool. Okay. Well, we're going to have David on many more times. There's so much that I feel like we left on the table that we can dive into, but I think the background and some of that was fruitful. So thank you for being here. And thank you guys for watching and tuning in. Again, we're going to post every Wednesday, and we're going to be posting every week. So we're going to have different guests on, and God forbid it would just be me talking. We're going to try and avoid that, okay? But thank you for tuning into the P.O.P podcast.
You do a good job of talking, though.
Oh,
so, yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
You're very
Thank
handsome.
you.
So.
I've got a, wow. I've got a lot of things to keep in the trophy case there.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Well, again, thanks, David, and thank you guys for tuning in to the P.O.P podcast. We'll catch you next week. I think that's it. Easy.
Boom.
Done.
Oh, he says be quiet.